lost in the universities in the corridors. My name is Jean-François Vallée. I'll be your chair for this session. Thank you for coming on a Saturday morning. That's very nice of you to show up for these presentations. It's nice to have a public event. It's always interesting. Our first presenter will be Libera Pisano from the University of Hamburg. Libera is currently junior fellow at the Maimonides Center for Advanced Studies at the University of Hamburg. Their research project is entitled From Isolation to Communities, Skeptical Strategies in Landauer's Anarchy, Limits of Language, Limits of Understanding, Linguistic Skepticism in Rosenzweig and Wittgenstein. She earned her PhD degree in theoretical philosophy at La Sapienza University in Rome under the supervision of Professor Donatella Di Cesare and Professor Paolo Vinci. She is co-director of the book series Umweg in Chipole with Dr. Bongiorno, Professor Esposito, Professor Wolf. She is also a research member of the project Les Arts Trompeurs, Machines, Magiques et Médias at the Université. Her presentation is entitled The Disappearance. You can see it right there, Alethia in the
So, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here for the first time in Montreal. And yeah, so Katharina is coming.
Ah.
She's arrived. What? Yeah? Nice. I will start. Martin Heidegger is a German thinker who offers a rigorous reflection on the question of technology. I believe that what makes Heidegger's thoughts so relevant in this matter is precisely the manner in which his philosophy deals with the question of medium, mediation, language, and truth. This paper owes its core idea to the brilliant work of David Gunkel and Paul Taylor entitled Heidegger in the Media of 2014. Since I do not have so much time, I don't want to oversimplify Heidegger's thought or to deal with questions beyond the scope of this paper. From my perspective as a philosopher of language in this contribution, I would like to investigate the conjunction between technology, media, according to Heidegger's understanding of this term, language and Aletheia, while also shedding light on its connection to magic. As is well known in his conference, The Question Concerning Technology, Die Frage nach der Technik, given in Munich in November 1953 and published in 1954, Heidegger expounds the famous thesis according to which the essence of technology has nothing to do with the technology. In opposition to the current conception, namely the instrumental and anthropological definition of technology and its notion of neutrality, Heidegger draws upon the notion of Aletheia as unconcealment to open up another thinking of the essence of technology, according to the idea that, I quote, technology is no mere means, it is the realm or revealing eye of truth. An investigation of this famous essay of Heidegger's, and in particular of his ontological understanding of technology as a means of a concealment of being connected to the destiny of Western metaphysics, falls beyond the scope of this paper. But I will try to use some elements of his philosophy to provide an overview of the relationship between medium and truth. So why is Heidegger's understanding of technology relevant? Firstly, because in his view, far from being a neutral medium, technology is pervasive. So I prefer the Latin pronunciation of medium and media. That's why I say like that. So neutral medium, technology is pervasive. It is an essential component of how human beings come to experience the world. The conventional understanding of technology as the material artifacts and instruments with which we routinely interact is correct. Heidegger means that this understanding corresponds to our everyday conceptualization and experience of how technology appears, how it functions, and how we come to evaluate it. But while correct, this formulation is not necessarily true, for it does not reveal the truth of technology in its essence. Consequently, technology, understood according to its standard instrumental and anthropological characterization is not the same as technology in its essence. As Heidegger reminds us, the true essence of technology is nothing technological. This thesis is closely connected to Heidegger's idea of mediation. According to Heidegger, media shape the realities we occupy and are not just pictures or copies of a pre-existing world in a Platonic sense, but the means of picturing a world and exercising real power over the reality of this world. The idea is that reality is brought into existence by language or by media in general, which produce what we understand as our world and initially bring it into existence. One can find this idea also in Jean Baudrillard's Simulation, in which he famously argued, by way of reference to a short story of Borges, that the territory no longer precedes the map, nor does it survive it. The precession of simulacra, I quote, it is the map that engenders the territory. Mediation is the way in which presence, seen as immediacy, is rejected, or better, the way in which presence disappears. Pure present, pure immediacy disappears through an ongoing and permanent mediation and process of unconcealment. Heidegger's conceptualization of the medium as a something constitutive of reality is clear in his theorization of things and language, which I will now outline as follows. Since mediation is the original and normative state of things, one can say that its characterization is crucial for understanding our relationship with media. According to Heidegger, the ontological status, or the kind of being that belongs to equipment, is primarily perceived as ready to hand, meaning that something becomes what it is, or acquires its properly thingly character in being put to work for some particular purpose. And only when the thing in question fails to work or breaks down, does it become present at hand, or Vorhandenheit. The Heideggerian concept of Zuhandenheit has a peculiar meaning if we apply it to the investigation of media. This is because something ready to hand is defined and conceptualized as a kind of intermediary, a kind of medium. If things are and come to be what they are first and foremost as equipment, instruments, and a means to an end, media will not be just one thing or one kind of things among the others, but whole things, insofar as they are something rather than nothing, are always and already media. As Michael Zimmerman explains by referring to Heidegger's example of a hammer, I quote, "In hammering away at the sole of a shoe, the cobbler does not notice the hammer. Instead, the tool is in effect transparent as an extension of his hand. For tools to work right, they must be invisible, in the sense that they disappear in favor of the work being done. The same can be said of media. Our various media devices do not normally become object of explicit contemplation as long as we are able to access online application. Media work or effectively mediate insofar as they are not seen as such, but as a passage toward the content they are designed to deliver. Heidegger's distinction between present at hand and ready to hand contains a foundational insight for critical media studies. This process characterizes not only media, but all forms of objective representation up to and including scientific knowledge. Consequently, the apparent effects of media are only a symptom of a primordial and widespread mediation that has already, from the very beginning, turned things into object of representation. In other words, mediation comes first and constitutes the primary condition in which we already find ourselves dealing with the object. The remoteness of the thing, the inability to think the thing as thing in its immediacy, is not some recent catastrophe when compared to some earlier age, when things were originally thought as things. Quite on the contrary, things have never been thought as things. And this process, due to what Heidegger calls the Seinsvergessenheit, so the forgetting of being, is something that has occurred from the very beginning, which distinguishes philosophical thinking as such. The second relevant aspect of mediation regards language, which is originally disclosive, and it brings things into the openness of disclosure in first place. In this fashion, there is a deep connection between language and technology, and this idea is also taken up by Dominique Bourg in his work L'Homme Artifice, when he speaks of technology and language as réseau d'artefacts, which constitute the domain of the human. As Terry Eagleton explains, I quote, language for Heidegger is not a mere instrument of communication, a secondary device for expressing ideas. It is the very dimension in which human life moves and brings the world to be in the first place. Only where there is language is there word, in the distinctively human sense. If language, the first media in terms of both temporal sequence and status, is originally revealing, then whatever comes to be is only in and by the mediation of language. This alternative interpretation of language and medium has a transformative effect on the question of truth. I think it's here, yeah. Because the language is originally disclosive or revealing, truth can no longer be conceptualized as a matter of measuring the correspondence between things and the representation of things. It is, in other words, not a matter of evaluating how well a statement about something represents the actual thing, or how well something incorporates its symbolic construction. Instead, truth will need to be reconfigured as a matter of the revealing of what is the place where reality unconceals itself, gives itself up to our contemplation. This idea of mediation is nothing but a way of dismantling a common sense realism. Realism and a particular Platonic understanding of representation have gone largely unchallenged and have been left virtually unquestioned for millennia. In contesting this assumption of realism, Heidegger not only breaks with Plato and the metaphysical tradition that developed in his wake, but also problematized the traditional concept of truth as correctness, correspondence, fidelity, and verification. Heidegger's efforts deliberately overturn common sense realism, whereby it is assumed that there is a real world of actual existing things that are then represented more or less adequately in various mediated forms. Instead, the world that is assumed to be out there, the things, people, events that share our sense of reality, is always an already brought forth structure and an effect of mediation. According to Heidegger, there is a crucial distinction between truth and correctness, starting from Plato's allegory of the cave. This particular understanding of truth as correct agreement or correspondence, has dominated the history of Western thought, as I say. Heidegger argues that the gaze of the former prisoner becomes more correct at the sight of the sun, at the sight of the light, and hence, so referring of course to Plato's allegory of the cave, and hence truth is characterized as orthotes, so as correctness of representation to the thing represented. Truth, understood as the correctness of representation to the thing, seems to correspond exactly to what we typically understanding and experience as truth. Consequently, Heidegger's question is more fundamental and ontological. Not at least because truth, as Heidegger explains, is not just one issue among the others, but the defining question of philosophy, which at least from Aristotle's time has been the science of truth. Our long cultural history of correspondence-based thinking means that truth is always presumed to be a matter of measuring the correctness of representation to the actual being of some object. As Heidegger insightfully points out, I quote, if our representation and assertions are supposed to conform to the object, then this being must be accessible in advance. It must already be given and out in the open. In response to this problem, Heidegger advocates an alternative conceptualization of truth that is not so much an innovation as a return to a more original and fundamental understanding of the concept. I quote, "Truth as correctness of representation presupposes, in order to be what it is, assimilation to the object, the openness of beings by which they become capable of being objects in the first place, and by which the representation becomes a faculty of presenting something before itself as such. Accordingly, correctness cannot constitute the original essence of truth if it itself is dependent on something more original. The original essence of truth must then be sought in a return to this openness." In formulating this more original understanding of truth, Heidegger returns to and capitalizes upon the ancient Greek word for truth, Aletheia, which he translates as unconcealing, uncovering, or unhiddenness, which is, I quote, "the fundamental trait of being itself." In other words, the theory of truth as correspondence, whether one tends to endorse the idealist or realist version, can only be true on the basis of a prior disclosure of things. So there is a prior disclosure of things, and then truth as correspondence. This prior disclosure of things, whereby things are first out in the open, in this opening, that makes agreement or correspondence possible in the first place. Therefore, this formulation is based on the ancient Greek word aletheia and reestablished truth on the ground of an original unconcealing from which correspondence eventually derives as a secondary aspect and side effect. In this way, Heidegger recovers a more original account of truth, one that is prior to correspondence, in both historical terms and in terms of its conceptual status. Let's see now what is the connection between aletheia and magic. Marcel Détienne's famous work entitled Les Maîtres de Vérité dans la Grèce archaïque sheds light on the interpretation of truth in archaic Greece. Aletheia is connected to lethe, forgetfulness, concealment, so through the privative alpha, and it means unforgetfulness, unconcealment. There is no position or contradiction between aletheia and lethe. Rather, there is an intermediate area between these two poles. This is the interplay between falsehood and truth. Aletheia plays a pivotal role in the transition from mythical to rational thought. It embodies at the same time a religious power and a philosophical concept, and in some way it constitutes a bridge as well as a break between them. In archaic Greece, it was the attribute of certain special function. Inspired poets, diviners, and just kings were automatically masters of truth. Then the philosopher arrived and, like this figure, claimed the ability to achieve and to reveal the truth. Détienne identifies three different domains of aletheia in archaic thought: poetry, justice, and prophecy. The first poetic representation of aletheia is in a Hesiod poem, but it achieves a pivotal role in the field of mantic speech or prophecy, connected to the process of divination and justice. There is no aletheia without its complementary relation to lethe, no aletheia without the muse, no aletheia without memory, no aletheia without justice, no aletheia without mantic speech and magic practice. In this system of thought, where a concept of truth is absent, aletheia cannot be so separated from price, ritual acts, and gesture. In a way, it is a kind of speech inseparable from a particular form of action and a pattern of behavior. It's a kind of magic religious speech, indistinguishable from action, and it is not subject to temporality, because it is at one with force beyond man. Hence, the truth is established by a magical religious speech based on memory as well as oblivion. Even justice is a mode of magic religious speech, which is efficacious, atemporal, and indissociable from symbolic behavior and meaning, and limited to an exceptional type of person. So, to sum up, aletheia is somehow connected to a form of magic that is revealing of truth, and it is nothing but the mediation in which phenomena are disclosed. In this process, appearance is deeply related to disappearance, and mediation is nothing but the condition of possibility of reality. The idea of mediation, in my view, calls into question an idea of immediacy which excludes human transformation and human freedom as well. We might say that the interpretation of the medium that results from an Heideggerian perspective sheds light on the status of magic itself. First of all, because the concept of Aletheia is deeply connected to magic religious practice. Secondly, because it implies a step back from an idea of truth as correspondence. Thirdly, because it is based on a rejection of realism itself. Moreover, the process of unconcealment is deeply connected to a magic idea of being. We might say that, in a way, in Heidegger's thought, one finds a magical hermeneutics of media, technology, things, language, and truth. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Libera, for this very dense and revealing presentation. I'm sure there will be some questions. We can take up to 10 minutes per speaker for questions. I think it's better to take questions after each presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. First, I want to say thank you very much because I'm French.
I'm Italian, so my accent is
my English not very good, but I have read Heidegger. I don't understand Heidegger in French, but with the presentation I begin to understand English. It's a magic problem. Thank you very much. So my question is, you make link between Heidegger and Baudrillard and the map of Borges. Can you explain the link between the two philosophers?
Yeah.
It's possible?
Yeah, so it was just a reference,
yes.
No? But simulation, I don't know. So simulation is in English. It is the translation of two essays of Baudrillard. And at the beginning of the second essay, when he speaks about the simulation in the, he distinguished, I suppose, 3 types of simulation. And but he starts from a novel of Borges. In this novel, he quotes the idea of the map. So it's not the map. It's not conformed to the territory, but the territory is, of course, is a result of the map. No, so there is an overturn of the causal and effect relationship also, no? Because the means, the medium, is in some way poiesis, creates, not the object, the reality. And in this case, so I choose this reference of Borges and Baudrillard to to explain, according to me, the relationship between media and reality with under an Heideggerian perspective.
But I think I'm not suspect that Baudrillard critic in Perfect Crime. Baudrillard said that I say in French, but you can translate.
Non, j'ai compris le français. Là, slowly.
C'est comme si les choses avaient avalé leur miroir. These things are
swallowed.
Oui.
And swallowed the mirror.
I think Baudrillard say don't like the simulacrum.
So it's a critique, but I don't. So according to me, I use these works really as an interpretation of the contemporary. So it's not I remember that I took some notes, and he spoke of a change, of a modification of paradigm, no? And everything is Narcissus today, okay? But I think that it's. I don't see a moral condemnation in these things. It's a kind of lecture and hermeneutics of the presence, according to me. So because he spoke of since the Renaissance we have counterfeit, production, and then a simulation. So there are the three different historical phases, and so I don't read this kind of ethical condemnation in his works, but maybe there is.
In France, we put in the same bag Baudrillard and the Boer.
Oui.
That's why I put this question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pivot off of that, and also I have this question anyway. Because Leroy shows he also has a reference to a Borges story at the beginning, talking about language and how it changes over time. And I'm just curious if your paper talking about Alethia and linguistics of truth and magic and concealment, if you've thought at all about how magic as a performing art has become more meta. We have a new meta language, following along Foucault's study of language to describe the complexities, more and more of the revelation of how certain tricks are done. And I'm just curious if that technique is being used.
It's really a great suggestion. No, you're right. Also because it's always associated with the exercise of power and the discourse. According to me, it would be really maybe. So it's my background. It's really this kind of understanding Foucaultian connection. Yeah, thank you. But I should mention it.
Thank you for your talk. Great. I would like you to ask can you explain more about the process of mediation that you brought up and the understanding of media that we have very often as a self-sufficient closed entity as an object.
Yeah, this is true.
I thought you wanted to kind of challenge it, but can you point out once more for me?
Yeah. So the idea of mediation, according to me, it's true. So it's true that in my paper I didn't give a kind of definition of media itself, no, because it's a kind of entities. But what I try to say is to use an Heideggerian vocabulary to understand it. And what is, according to Heidegger, and according to my reading of Heidegger, media is the process in which the reality, so we understand reality and we deal with reality. And media is connected to our interpretation of things and our interpretation of language. So in Heidegger understanding, according to me, of course, medium is language and things. So this process of mediation, and according to me, it's really a kind of important, how can I say, it's really an important event in the history of philosophy also, because it's not just the process of mediation, it's connected also to human works and to human possibility to change the reality. It's connected to human freedom. And what about the understanding of mediation in Heidegger? Now, as I point out, it's according to me, really in his understanding of things. There is, of course, this idea of Zuhandenheit and Vorhandenheit, and the idea of language that brought up the reality. Everything is created by language. Really, by saying really shortly, and it will appear a kind of oversimplification, I know, but it's what I try to sum up.
Maybe one more question, if anybody else has one. Maybe I would ask one question. You're probably familiar with McLuhan's vision of the medium, or he describes the medium as, well, it's very complicated in understanding media as extensions of the human body or nervous system, and there's the whole theory that men shape their tools and are then shaped by their tools. And there's also this idea of the narcissist, what he calls narcissist narcosis. We're not conscious anymore of the medium that we're using. We're amputating part of our body. You think there's a connection to be made this kind of like the fact that we're not conscious of the media that we're inventing and the effects they're having on us, on our body, on our conscience.
Yeah, maybe yes. So I think that so Heidegger's what Heidegger said about technology is really so old now maybe, but we can use as a theoretical paradigm, I can say. But maybe Heidegger today will say the same things. I don't know. But yeah, of course there are other. So what for me it's really interesting is that Heidegger's idea of regarding technology really offer a theoretical paradigm, and it's used also in all the critical media studies theory and so on. So according to me, so it's interesting for the theoretical argumentation. But today I don't know what if something changed. Of course, the idea of with all this practice, new device, and new interpretation. I don't know, but it will be, according to me, interesting to also to apply now this kind of theory.
One more.
Just in answer to you, yes, the important part of Heidegger that he says we have to think that there are in the being we have things that you are background and things that you are foreground. And there, in this dynamic between what you can foreground and background, there you can link with you, actually. Because you can naturally put your emphasis on the tool of the hammer, and then it is another part that if you put your emphasis on the effect that you have. And there, for me, is the most important part, not the technology part and the apparatus that he's discussing. This is kind of outmoded, and I think it's not relevant because in modern media products we have always the foreground of the technology, right? But the dynamic and the greatness of Heidegger was this. What I take out of them, so you are more inside Heidegger than me, but this is what I got from him, and then make the link.
Between figure and ground.
Yeah, that's it. So the hermeneutics is like that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sarah. We are now, we will have a talk by Kurt Vanhoutte, I don't know if I pronounced well done. He's a professor of performance studies and visual art criticism at the Université of Antwerpen, where he helped to establish and currently coordinates a master program in film and theater studies. Kurt is a spokesperson for the Research Center for Visual Poetics, a research group in theater, film, and related artistic media at the University of Antwerp, divided in 4 areas of research: performative, intermedial, artist, and textual poetics. His basic line of research investigates processes of intermediality emerging under the cultural and technological conditions of modernity and late modernity. His interest more specifically concerns the effects of science and technologies on narrative and stylistic characteristics of performance art, as well as the ensuing impact on contemporary notions of theatricality, performance, and text. I'm sorry. I think as Katharina arrives, it's do you want to sit up with everybody else? I'm sorry we started without you. So the title of Kurt's talk is a very nice title: Charting the Stars on the Logic of Presence and Mediation in Science, Theater, Then and Now.
Thank you very much. Hi everybody, I'm delighted to be here. It has been a very inspiring conference. And I would like to take the opportunity to talk to you about the PAS. This is an initiative that brings together scholars from the human, social, and exact sciences, as well as artists, visual technicians, and planetarium professionals to investigate the history, present state, and future of astronomical spectacle. We look into the performance, the intermedial qualities of these shows, but also their perception and experience. Experienced by different audiences, we explore the ways in which the shared experience of astronomical spectacles fostered new senses of the collective and of the world in metropolitan culture and beyond. Our case studies, as you will see, range from the beginning of the 19th century over the 20th century and into the 21st century. An important component is arts-based, producing experimental artistic reenactments as a heuristics for studying the shows, spectacular astronomy. And via a series of public performances, the collaboration with artists also provided an opportunity to foster public reflection on the changing meanings and technical modalities of scientific spectacle, including their practical implementation for science communication in or as future planetariums. Now, I would like to give you an idea of the research interests of this research network, and the presentation will be in two parts, one focusing on two historical case studies from the 19th century, and one second part focusing on a contemporary digital reenactment that has the ambition of becoming a future planetarium. Take a look at this picture, painted as early as 1766, showing a scientist giving a lecture on eclipses using a so-called orrery, also called a planetarium. As a generic term, an orrery was a very popular amusement and teaching device used to illustrate the relative position of the planets. In this case, the faces of the audience light up in the illumination of science, their perceptive mind being indicated by the presence of children. Spectators look back at their own universe from an imaginary outside perspective. And even though we don't see much of the celestial bodies, we understand its impact through the gaze and the fascination of the spectators. They, so to say, mirror our own curiosity and our own position towards this miniature theater of the skies. And while the two adults surveying the scene confirm the source and authority of scientific knowledge, the other spectators in the picture, especially the children, are clearly mesmerized by the shining sun glowing in the darkened room. This tension between serious science teaching, here associated with the act of recording and writing, and the dreamlike state of immersion is powerfully inscribed in the setting. Scientific commitment and aesthetic delight melt together in a metaphysical glow that seems to animate the whole scene, as if you were witnessing a kind of séance where mythical constellations reveal the mysteries of the cosmos. My paper will develop along the two axes that I have just discerned in this painting. One traverses certain features of aesthetic immersion, the mutual imbrication of science and arts, and the other axis traces lines of development in the idea of technological progress, precision, and control. What binds the two axes, wonder and instruction, is the notion of the intermedial spectacle as a distinct, albeit ambivalent, mode of modernity. When did you last visit a planetarium? Chances are high that this question prompts you to recall your childhood. Today, the motions of the heavens are the business of highly specialized technological environments. A dominant feature is their use of precision engineering expertise, combining digital projection and lasers. Conversely, in the 19th century, attending planetarium lectures was a popular and persistent public pursuit for adults and children alike. If you had visited London, Paris, or Berlin in the 19th century, it is quite probable that for an evening out, you might have attended a performance on astronomy. It was a central activity for expressing public curiosity about science and enthusiasm for it. The performances of Adam Walker and his sons, two sons, are noteworthy in their attempts to fuse theatrical illusions with educational aspirations. Over the course of almost 60 years, from 1760 to well into the 1820s, the Walker family offered an elaborately entertaining lecture entitled The Eiduranian, that's Greek for Form of the Heavens. The Walkers held their lectures in theaters like the Royal Theatre, King's Theatre, or even the English Opera House. The Eiduranian, this installation, could be mounted on the stage and concealed by curtains during each change of scene. Apparently, it used some kind of back projection, probably magic lanterns, to produce astronomical effects on screen. To achieve a sense of drama, Walker used special lighting and mechanical effects. The sound of a celestina, that's a glass harmonium, and what was then called, quote unquote, an amusing manner of speech. The show, interestingly, followed the structure of a classical theater play. The fifth and last scene is reported to be the most spectacular, with the approach of night initiated by the machinery and, in the end, quote-unquote, powdered with stars. And Walker is just one example, as from the start, competition was fierce. In a way, astronomy performances became instances of the emerging culture of mass spectacle and were at the time being acknowledged as such by the audiences as soon as they demonstrated their ability to inspire the visitor with a mixed emotion of reverence and authority. They tied together strategies of dramaturgy and representation adopted from theater and melodrama, without, however, letting go of the scientific goals and aspirations that motivated the shows in the first place. They were admired as a theater of the skies in which the celestial bodies are the actors, revolving around the main lecturer, director, actor, who posited himself in the middle of the scene providing a dramatic narrative of cosmological proportions. A spectacular dimension proved indispensable. I invite you to read a critical opinion of a commentator in the London Lions, who in 1826 firmly stated that, at the end of the paragraph, and I quote, "The science of astronomy is, perhaps, more than any other which can be named of the whole circle, the very science of which a popular display may most successfully be aided by the ornamental arts. Music, painting, sculpture may be called in as auxiliaries with powerful effect and manifest benefit. A tasteful introduction of poetry may be deemed almost essential to success. And we would undertake that Urania need not disdain the cooperation of Terpsichore herself." So the muse of astrology in the company of the muse of music and dance, the ideal pair. However, at the same time, astronomy as entertainment also always drew a measure of skepticism. Some reviewers claimed that principles of scientific merit were seriously compromised when the spectacular became the essence of the performance. An integral part of every review of the Eiduranian and similar shows was then a critical list that held up against the light of science and reason all the factual errors that were made in the show the evening the show was performed. Nevertheless, this did not stop showmen such as Sir Bartley, whose shows were equally popular, to take the stage. Here we see a billboard announcing the Grand Orrery displayed in his performances. Must have been a similar installation. Sir Bartley had a heart for science. However, he was first and foremost one of the greatest actors of his time. He was the only actor, for example, who was allowed to read Shakespeare to the English Queen. But he performed scientific shows that looked very much alike the ones put on stage by the scientists themselves. You see them next to each other. Also in Paris, capital of the 19th century, public lectures on astronomy became a collective passion, occasioning mass celebrations and bringing large crowds. Many artists undoubtedly profited from this folk. One of them was Henri Robin, a magician, who started performing in the theater at the Boulevard du Temple, where le tout Paris came to enjoy popular culture. Robin combined classical tricks with science entertainment and even the evocation of ghosts. Robin was praised for a new type of performance, a hybrid type of performance that excelled in creating intellectual awareness through talking to the senses. I just briefly show you some images that, taken together, might illustrate the astounding variety of the shows. So you already saw an astronomical scene. This is a very popular magic scene, La bouteille inépuisable au liqueur. So the bottle never stops pouring liquor. Everybody liked that very much, of course, during the show. So all these things were shown on the same evening. And interestingly enough, so considering then the scientific scenes, Robin did not only represent science on scene, put it on display, he also did scientific experiments. This has something to do with the truth regimes from the 18th and the 19th century, where if you saw somebody doing it, it must have been true. I mean, now if you read a book on science, let's say quantum physics, you believe that it's true because the authority says that it's true. In the 18th century and also in the 19th century, if you saw it happen, then with your own eyes, then it was really the truth. And this one, of course, the most famous photo of Henri Robin, a ghost photograph, and what you see here must have looked more or less the same on scene. I just put two together, so the photograph and the etching, to show you the similarities. And I also inserted, after Joe Culpepper's presentation yesterday and the little discussion we had, the way he did it. So the Pepper's Ghost, this famous installation that was used to evoke ghosts. So he combined science, the evocation of ghosts, doing experiments, showing experiments, etc. in one show. But also in Paris, things were changing in the second half of the 19th century. And competition between independent initiatives, like the ones of Robin, and universitaire or academics heightened. In 1864, when Robin reached the zenith of success, professors in France were urged and paid by the state to redouble their efforts to address lay audiences through free public lectures. The response to this call came from professors throughout France, massively. And one of the most significant results was the inauguration of scientific evenings for broad audiences at the Sorbonne. It is telling that these events at the university were scheduled in the evening, when popular theaters were raising the curtains and evening shows opened. Correspondingly, Robin's career fizzled out when academic activities were dispersing rapidly across different public sites, altering and eventually reshaping the appeal of science entertainment. At the end of the day, the accelerating professionalization of science, the alliance with the academic profession, and the expulsion of colorful theater entertainment were working together to marginalize independent showmen with their theatrical use of science. At this point, it had become hard to fuse magic and science and keep a balance on the classical theater stage between the sensational and the instructive. Moreover, emerging around 1830 were various technologies such as photography, printable plates, or other types of automated production, aiming at a mechanical image gained with as little human intervention as possible. These new techniques were praised for allowing nature to allow its own imprints, that's quote, supposedly unhindered by human error, like Carte du Ciel, that was made in 1887 at the Observatoire de Paris, is such an example where they photographed the night sky with the aim of really making an extensive map through technology, through the use of technology. In short, by the end of the 19th century, the urge for scientific accuracy and its related mechanization of work had led to an ever greater standardization of practices, giving the new astronomy a distinctive industrial flavor. However, the appeal of astronomical spectacles did not wane in the 20th century. They merely took new forms when the first dome-shaped projection planetariums began appearing in German cities in the 1920s. The modern theaters equally were greeted with awe and reverence, and to this day they testified with a vivid public appetite for both myth, the age-old constellations that you always see in planetariums also today, myth on the one side and progress on the other side. In these venues, audiences engaged with science, technology, and the world. The planetarium also inspired artists and critics to negotiate the contradictions of their own times. I don't have a lot of time to go into that, but maybe we can, during the discussion, mention a few examples. Brecht, for an example, made a difference, as you might know, between the P-type and the C-type. P spectator and C spectator, the carousel spectator. And the P spectator would then be, of course, the planetarium spectator, who has the right balance between immersion and critical distance. In the context of Pars, contemporary artist Erik Joris and crew developed celestial bodies, a family of immersive intellectual virtual orreries to explore the performativity of images, the bodily engagement of spectators, and how embodied experiences of spectacular astronomy might stimulate belief. For the remainder of this presentation, I want to show you a movie. It's kind of recording of what this artist made, what he produced. Although their work is often presented in theater contexts, Yodas Company is quite unlike the usual theater company. It may be better described as a multidisciplinary team of artists, researchers, and technicians using live performance as medium to test, play with, and reflect on the aesthetic possibilities of technologies. For the past 15 years, they have attracted much attention with high-tech performances in which audiences are partially immersed in virtual worlds. Characteristic of their way of working is their use of various kinds of head-mounted displays that present users with panoramic video images that respond to the user's viewing direction and movements. As you can see here, while moving through the studio, the immersant is moving through visualizations of the solar system. We call her an immersant, not a spectator, because a spectator is perhaps too much reminiscent of the dispositif of cinema. What she experiences is projected on the screen for the other spectators to see. Now, this is quite unlike planetariums that present visions of the universe as existing independently from the viewer. In this planetarium, the solar system unfolds from the direct encounter and interaction with participants. The immersant to-be first meets with a person who assists in putting on the head-mounted display and explains how to move around. After putting on the display, the immersant sees the image of an avatar, the white person, speaking with the voice of that same person who is present in the room. The avatar introduces herself as a guide, and moving around allows immersants to change their perspective and to explore the relationship between the planets. So the participant feels the enchanting effects of a universe of which she is part, but at the same time, a universe, of course, that transcends her. And magic it is. Through the collaboration with astronomers, we are now, for an example, able to put the immersant in a real existing universe with two suns. We feed in the algorithms into the environment. Or in a constellation with the recently discovered 7 planets orbiting a star named Trappist, named after the excellent Belgian beer, orbiting the star. Well, you heard about it perhaps in the newspapers, the 7 planets that were discovered. So you can just feed in this information in the environment, and then you can walk around in this, Trappist-based universe. The immersive experience by means of embodied enactment is meant to fully capture and engage the senses of the audience. There is a sense of displacement, sharpening of sensation. But at the same time, the relationship between the virtual world and the space from where it is activated is made present time and again. For example, when the guide invites the immersant to touch a football on a string, the movements of which, tracked by motion capture, will be used to create an impression of the sun in orbit in the virtual space. There is, in other words, a connection stage between the avatar encountered in the virtual universe and an actual person in the space within which the immersant finds herself. The result of such a dialectic between immersion and instruction, magic and contemplation, is new and innovative. Through digital technologies, it produces embodied knowledge. It might be the planetarium of the future because it makes us conscious that indeed our universe has no center, no privileged vantage point or no abstract view from above. It makes us conscious that our vision du monde entirely depends on our body, its relative motion and performance in space. But at the same time, this planetarium is not unlike the astronomy theater of the 19th century, I think, or the ones that used the magic lantern, the Zeiss machine, etc., to invoke a sense of wonder and involvement when looking at an artificial version of the night sky. Now we can only guess, show you the last image, coming to a conclusion. Okay. At how the new planetarium will continue to engage us when it starts communicating new knowledge of the cosmos. Only 2 weeks ago, Brussels-based artist Peter de Buizer, seen here, premiered with a show in the planetarium that explained the basics of quantum physics. A single narrator, de Buizer himself, appeared to float against the background of images that connected the infinity of the cosmos to the unbelievably minuscule scale of strings, referring to the string theory. Not by coincidence, the narrative structure and framework of this show is the detective story. One of the reviewers remarked that the show could be seen as a good reason to add the planetarium to the official theater venues in Brussels. In a way, this brings me to the end of my presentation. This reviewer echoing a long-lasting idea that is eloquently phrased by Helmut Werner, I think, in 1953, when he was documenting the dome-shaped planetariums, and where he said that the planetarium cannot and may not assume the character of a museum in which the exhibits speak for themselves. It has a far truer comparison with the theater, indeed. In addition to communicating positive knowledge, it must leave the spectator with a deep ethical impression of the wonders of the heavens. I'll end here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk. I'm sure there will be many questions.
I really enjoyed that trip. And the question I was forming was, as you were talking about this historical period, was why did it go away? And then of course it didn't go away; it just transformed. But then I think bringing the virtual reality component into it is really interesting, and that sort of reformulated my question to the saying that both the 19th century events had and this are there is the combination of technology with science, right? And so how much of it is a fascination with technology and how much of it is a fascination with science? Or is it a certain way that those two combine with each other? And this actually relates to a bit of what Libera was saying about Heidegger's notion of technology also.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the question is, please check. Is that another question? Or?
Yeah, yes, thank you for the question. I'm not an expert on Heidegger, so I won't go. I won't venture into that field, unfortunately. But I'm sure Libera will. No, it's really this mutual imbrication. It's very difficult to discern both dimensions. I mean, to take them apart, the aesthetic dimension, let's say, and the dimension of science. For an example, that's also why I put Adam Walker, who was a scientist, next to Sir Bartley, who was an actor, and they more or less performed the same show. Also, Erik Joris, for an example, he's being subventioned by the government to make artistic theater, let's say, and he does so. So the shows are sold as artistic products. But at the same time, they are being used as a kind of experimental environment in research centers and at universities. And the shows put on stage in the theater venue compared to the shows used at the university, well, they look quite the same. They're almost the same. And also the theater shows wouldn't be there without the genuine technologies used, the technologies that Erik Joris, director, can use at the university, or in combination with, or in collaboration with companies. Very often technologies that aren't commercialized yet. So there's really this overlap between the two in terms of production, in terms of distribution also, because the shows get distributed in popular venues, but also through science networks, and also in terms of experience, I think, because when you look at such a show, or when you're immersed in such a show, it's didactic. I mean, you learn about the universe. But at the same time, it overwhelms you. I mean, it's very immersive in the sense that, well, is it an aesthetic experience? Well, during the conference, I noticed that a lot of times the notion of aesthetic experience was linked to truth. And in that sense, it might be an aesthetic experience. Yeah. Maybe that would be an interesting way to connect science and technology and art through the sense of experiencing truth and materiality. But that's your.
So it could be interesting to connect. So with the concept of experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Aesthetic and yeah, all the way to stay. So our design and the work.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thanks. I would go along those lines as well. I don't think you can have a clear-cut separation from theater or entertainment in general, and science shows. On the plane to come here, I was watching a sci-fi movie, and it was it was quite the modernized version of the Planetarium. Showing you the last one with
passengers.
That's right.
Yeah.
And also, as a kid, I used to be equally fascinated by plays and science. I think most of us can relate to that. There used to be a great planetarium in Montréal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's still any good, but
It's a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the PAS is mainly a collaboration between performance theory scholars and historians of science. And what historians of science learned us, and I'm talking also a bit on behalf of Nele, Wynants, who is also participating in this project. What they learned us is that at the end of the 19th, or during the second half of the 19th century, you had what they called the Great Divide, where art and science indeed got partitions into two different fields by the state, as I briefly mentioned, and where there was a kind of partition du sensible being implemented by the state, and it lasted for quite a long time. Although, of course, there is an undercurrent. It still went on, but in the official discourse, both were really discerned. Until now, of course, where you also see that high-tech companies are hiring artists to design their innovative technologies or whatever. So I think it has been away, not completely, of course, but it has diminished, and now it's back again. Also on the level of academics, of course, universities working together with art schools. That's another story.
Well, thank you very much. What I learned from you is actually the historical shifting of seeing and visuality, as I call it. Could you think about relating the visuality, the shift in different forms of visuality, to what we call now immersion, and that is, to me, very often theorized ahistorically?
Yeah, yes, I think the keyword there would be embodied knowledge.
Yeah.
And now, well, there's a lot of discourse on embodied knowledge and the fact that, well, yesterday we also talked about, and the day before, about tactility and the senses as another way to experience a reality. The interesting thing is, so I'm very happy you brought this up, thank you very much. The interesting thing is that, well, we tend to talk about it a lot today, but it also has always been there, because we tend to look at history with a bias ourselves, identifying it as mainly a visual culture. But for an example, one of the things we're now researching is walking orreries. So you had the orrery. The thing is, of course, that you can't see it very well because they're standing in front of it, but you know it's a desktop model of the universe with balls. That it's kind of a clockwork. But you also had, for an example, in the 19th century in Victorian England, you had walking orreries, and it was a part of the things children learned at school, and they walked the orrery. So you had a kind of drawing on the floor of the universe, and then the children had to perform the moon, the sun, Mars, or whatever, and they walked the trajectory, let's say, of the celestial bodies at the right pace. Well, right pace didn't take them so long, but you know what I mean, scaled down, of course. And this also was a very embodied way to learn about the universe, because you're not standing in the center, as in a cinematographic device implemented in the present-day planetariums. You're walking around and you're seeing the universe from different perspectives, and you're embodying the celestial bodies in a very primitive way. But in a sense, this walking orrery practice inspired Erik Yodas to make this orrery, an orrery that is, as you rightly said, an orrery that is truly immersive, where you are also located at the inside of the image and not merely standing outside looking at it from a central point of view. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it's very good, and I think you could even link to the tradition of walking labyrinths, as you have it in church, coming from the mystics of this, going by your body to the higher inside. That is sometimes related to God, as long as God was an action kind of, or accepted, and you should embody it. And I'm not sure if you have been in church with someone sometimes, and when the labyrinth was open and you are going with a crowd, this kind of labyrinth is great. It's really great feeling. So you have to experience, and this is part of the performativity that comes from your body, where you really are inside yourself, and then you relate to the historical knowledge. And embodied knowledge has often, to me, this kind of knowledge here, but it's somewhere else. Yeah, it's not here in the head alone.
Thank you very much for this very fascinating suggestion. It also reminds me of the fact that Eric Joris, that's a limitation of these kinds of environments. You can only enter it by yourself. It's a one-on-one experience. Whereas he wanted to implement crowds, because he also said, well, if you walk around, a lot of people, different things happen. And he also wants to complement the installation with another dimension, gravity.
Yes.
Yeah. He devised all kinds of crazy mechanical wheels that were too difficult to execute, but that would make you feel gravity when you turn around a certain celestial body. So.
And the next step actually it challenged the idea if not the body is a medium itself.
Mm-hmm.
And we would say, at least in our field, it's a basic medium, but it's more an abstract form than just a concrete form. And then you can relate apparatus or technology to this as you have shown. But the basic medium of the body, and this is the basic idea from the performance there, it's really crucial. In our thinking that this is in media, intermediality not really brought up yet. So there, I think we have to do.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is, I think we could go on forever. I think asking questions is fascinating, but we'll move on because we've got two more papers. And maybe at the end, we could come back and ask questions and connect these papers that are all interconnected. I think there's a lot of relationships we can make between them. Our next paper is by Katharina Rein. Katharina's Rein studied cultural history and theory, philosophy and ancient history at the Humboldt-University in Berlin, where she obtained her MA in 2012. Since 2013, she has been a researcher at the International Research Institute for Cultural Techniques and Media Philosophy at the Humboldt also. In summer 2016, she was a temporary lecturer at the Department of Theater Studies at the Freie Universität in Berlin. And from 2014 to 2015, she has acted as a member of the editorial team of the Zeitschrift für Medien- und Kulturforschung. She is currently working on a doctoral dissertation on stage magic. She is a member of the international research project Les Arts Trompeurs, Machines Magiques, Média, where she is currently responsible for the research axis L'Art Magique, Pratique et Discours. She has published a monograph in the field of horror studies and various articles in German and English. Katharina's talk is entitled Vanishing Technology, Transparency of Media in State Magic.
Thank you. So maybe I should say a couple of words for those of you who have heard me before. I've so far been always talking about single illusions, because each of the chapters of my PhD deals with one illusion. So now I actually reached the state where I'm capable of saying something more general than just talking about case studies. And this is what you're going to hear now. So it's a bit more theoretical, I suppose. I hope it still works. Yeah, so as you know, the 19th century was an age of unprecedented technological and scientific progress. It experienced not only the industrialization of economy and the mechanization of transport and labor, but also the beginnings of modern medicine and the medialization of everyday life. Technology reshaped perception as a series of sweeping changes in technology and culture created distinctive new modes of thinking, and also thinking about and experiencing time and space. At the same time, entertainment business came to rely to a great extent on illusionism in the shape of panoramas, dioramas, and optical devices such as thaumatrops, kaleidoscopes, and stereoscopes. And stage magicians were about to initiate what many magic historians consider the golden age of conjuring. As part of that, many of them specialized in grand illusions from at least sort of in the second half of the 19th century when it started. And by grand illusions, I mean highly visible effects which unfold and often, or most of them unfold as sort of narrative, sometimes a rudimentary one, but it is usually something around humans or large animals, and they employ extensive stage machinery or apparatus. So as opposed to sleight of hand, card tricks, coins, etc., grand illusion is something happening on stage and being big. Most illusions, in fact, that still dominate the cultural imagination today were invented during this so-called golden age. Depending on whose time scale you find more convincing, that would be something around 1850 to 1930 or 1890 to 1920. So there's a certain range depending on who you want to include. Combining mechanization, romantic wonder, and a pre-World War belief in progress, magicians of the time seized upon the newest technologies, materials, and inventions and incorporated them into their shows in various manners, especially in grand illusions, because of course they lend themselves to that. So this paper argues that the disappearance of the means facilitating the illusion is an essential characteristic of stage magic, especially of grand illusions that became popular in the second half of the 19th century. Understood as media in the broadest sense of the term is the in-between, which allows for an exchange. The stage itself can be regarded as medium, of course. The same is true for the stage machinery as well as magicians' apparatus. Now, in German media theory, several scholars such as Sibylle Kremer and Dieter Mersch postulated a media theory of negativity. This thesis, and Libera has mentioned that before, this thesis claims that in order to achieve the best possible effect, the medium has to become imperceptible, while it only emerges as a means in the moment of dysfunction. For instance, if we watch TV, we do not perceive the television set as a technical hardware device as such. We also do not have to understand its workings to use it, even less so in the time of more complex and small electronics such as smartphones and whatnot. Rather, we focus on the program, on the TV program as we see it, which is kind of in a perception detached from the transmission medium itself. So for the effect of the medium, such as watching the newest episode of Twin Peaks, it is irrelevant if the medium that brings this to us is a classic television set, a smart TV, a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone, because the medium itself becomes transparent as long as it is working smoothly. That's the only point where you actually get to see it. Now, I'm arguing that the same applies to the magician's stage, regarded as a media dispositive. In order for the illusion to be effective, the means producing it must become imperceptible. Magicians' media, too, are rendered invisible and thus negated, while at the same time their effect is emphasized. This disappearance is the very basis of any grand illusion. For instance, in the levitation, which is the most obvious one, I guess, the machinery supporting the levitating assistant or performer must not be perceived by the audience for the illusion to set in. And what is more, magicians of the Golden Age were aware of the disappearance of the apparatus being a necessary element of conjuring, and often referred to it in their illusions by explicitly pointing out to the spectators that they cannot see the means creating the effect. Modern magic thus emerges as a performative practice reflecting its own media usage. This quality, the vanishing of its media and its thematization on stage, is what I'm going to talk about in more detail now. Now, at first glance, it seems paradoxical that Western European and US American stage conjuring reached its golden age in the time of industrialization, mechanization, rationalism, as well as institutionalization and systemization of knowledge. This connection and interrelation was the starting point, in fact, of my PhD project, because I started to wonder what kind of magic it was that was put out by this kind of culture in the late 19th century. Now, to think of magic's golden age as a reaction to enlightenment in the shape of a sort of re-enchantment of the world simplifies the matter, of course. Rather, what I assume is that the opposition between the so-called enlightenment and what people who perceive themselves as enlightened call superstition is a fictitious one. Thus, the golden age of conjuring is neither a regression to a pre-enlightened set of beliefs, nor a reaction to modernity in the sense of a compensation for or a counter-movement to rationalism. It is not a response to an industrial modern culture's longing for a magically connoted pre-scientific worldview. On the contrary, 19th century mechanization is the conditio sine qua non of modern secular magic. These two do not form an opposition to, but a partnership with each other. For instance, several grand illusions of the time relied on materials such as large sheets of glass, as the Pepper's Ghost illusion that we were just seeing in Kurt's talk, or steel wires that were used for the levitation. These materials only became available thanks to innovations of the mid-19th century. So I think, if I remember correctly, the industrialization of glass production set in the 1850s, and the Pepper's Ghost illusion was from 1861, so it immediately seized on this technology. The success of full evening magic shows, which became a feature of the time, particularly for US American magicians, was based on the economic advantages of extensive tours, and these in turn would not have been possible without modern means of transport, such as railways and steamships. The development of synthetic dyes, also around 1850, permitted the opulent, colorful stage sets and costumes, while the invention of color lithography allowed for the creation of the elaborate, brightly colored posters distributed by magicians that we're all going to see, or there will be a chance to see at the museum in a couple of days. What is more, modern magic reflected on its own material basis as well as its fundamental constructivism. As practitioners of secular magic, a term coined by some enduring to describe, quote, the technically produced magic of conjuring shows and special effects, which stakes no serious claim to contact with supernatural. Modern magicians do not pretend to be in league with otherworldly powers, as you all know, and instead secular magic exhibits its own artificiality and technicity. It's being made by humans, if you want. So I argue that by doing so, magic functions as an analytic of media effects. Without doubt, grand illusions can be regarded as producing media effects, since they rely on the use of media, be it apparatus, stage machinery, technical communication media sometimes, or classical media like glass or mirrors. However, in secular magic, as opposed to earlier presentations of conjuring that referred to supernatural agency, spectators are aware that they are witnessing illusions rooted in technology and or science. So in the second half of the 19th century, the spectators' belief that they might witness anything truly supernatural is generally out of the question. Now, according to Wally Smith, the premise that the supernatural agency was only a simulated one was well established no later than at the time of Robert Houdin, so around 1850. This in turn means that the illusionist's media effects were not presented merely for their own sake, but were always implicitly displayed as a product of an unknown or invisible technology. In contrast to special effects in theater plays, which serve the purpose of furthering the narrative or drama while striving to not draw attention to themselves as effects, the illusions on a magician's stage are emphasized as such. Now, because spectators were aware of the illusory character of the show they were seeing, they were also aware that what appeared to be a supernatural event was in fact a media effect. What is more, illusionists have been referring to this implicit knowledge in their performances at least since the late 18th century. Now, in our magic, which is possibly the first theoretical treatise of stage magic, I don't know if anyone knows anything else better than me, please tell me, but I think that would be the first, at least in modern magic. John Neville Maskelyne and David Devon, two of the most influential magicians around 1900, named three methods of misdirection in stage conjuring. That is distraction, disguise, and simulation. Now, while the first two are fairly clear, I want to say a bit more about simulation, and they define it by, quote, the principle of giving apparent existence to things that do not exist, or presence to things that are absent, end quote. What do they mean by that? So, for example, if you look at the Vanishing Lady, an illusion by Boëthius de Courta from 1886, one of the most iconic illusions, and it's still performed today. I just saw it a couple of months ago on stage. Now, in this illusion, a performer is seated in a chair on stage and covered by a large cloth. The magician then lifts the cloth and it disappears along with the performer. So here it is crucial that the performer seems to be sitting in the chair a little longer than she actually is. So the whole covering her with the cloth process is actually part of this simulation. What actually happens is that she's sort of covered by a wireframe And while the magician walks around and arranges the glass, she already makes her way out of the chair, while her silhouette is still there. So when she subsequently re-enters from the wing, the time elapsed between her disappearance and her reappearance seems shorter, which enhances the effect. Now, building on what Maskelyne and Devant says, Wally Smith adds another principle, and that is dissimulation. He writes, and it's a somewhat longer quote I'm going to read. If simulation involves the production of an effect, then dissimulation refers to the complementary means by which spectators are prevented from knowing about the secret methods and mechanisms behind that effect. Importantly, dissimulation implies more than concealment. It implies that the secret methods and mechanisms are rendered absent. It is thus crucial that the performer seems to be there in this chair after she has already vanished. But it is also crucial that this effect is not perceived as a possible illusion. So there can be no doubt about the fact that the silhouette created by the wireframe, which of course the spectators don't know, that this is actually the performer. Under no circumstances must the audience suspect the existence of this wireframe, which means the technology necessary for the production of this effect must be imperceptible. Or to put it differently, the medium creating the effect must remain invisible, be it a mirror, a trapdoor, key, or a piece of large stage machinery. Now, Maskelyne and Devant also referred to this. This is already in 1911. And again, a quote, "Magical appliances should be so constructed that their inner devices are not concealed by a mere covering of some sort, but are disguised by blending with the general structure. In fact, so far from suggesting the possibility of there being anything discoverable, the magician's accessories should rather look like objects of normal construction, which nobody would associate with trickery." End quote. So by looking inconspicuously, magical apparatus and props deny their agency in the creation of the illusion. And what is more, this denial also extends to the agency of the performers and stagehands involved. Just as agencies captured in apparatus had to be carefully erased, so too the instrumental role of the magician was in need of dissimulation. And this also extends, as I said, to onstage assistants and stagehands. Along similar lines, Francesca Coppa mentioned in her article that magic shows aim for the disappearance of physical labor, although she actually writes about it in view of gender relations. So for this reason also, the well-rehearsed words, movements, and gestures of performers in a magic show must seem natural and spontaneous, which is why one of the fundamental rules for practicing magicians is to never repeat an effect on the same night. Because Wally Smith points out that repetition would unmask what appeared to be natural gestures, patter, etc., is in fact artificial, scripted, and rehearsed. So magicians of the late 19th century emphasized not only the effect, that is the illusion itself, but also the imperceptibility of the means creating it. And that is crucial because media sort of imply that they would be self-referential, and this is also what we find here. Now again, if I want to use the Vanishing Lady as an example, because this is also a particularly intriguing example. And I'm going to give you a more detailed account of the performance because I need some more details for the next part. So this is the way David Devant describes Bertie de Colletta's performance in his autobiography. Bertie walked forward with a newspaper in his hand. This he unfolded and spread out in the center of the stage. He then picked up a light, ordinary-looking chair and placed it in the center of the newspaper. He then handed a lady in, and she seated herself on this chair. Bertie proceeded to cover her up with a large piece of purple silk, pinning it around her head and shoulders, dropping the rest and draping it to the floor. No part of the silk was allowed to lie outside the newspaper. There was a pause. Bertie came down the stage, looked at the draped figure, took hold of the silk with two hands, one about the waist and the other at the head, and threw the silk up in the air. It seemed to leave his hands in a flash. Both woman and silk had utterly disappeared. Again, the chair was lifted off the newspaper. He then picked up the newspaper and folded it together. And then the last bit is that she walks in again and takes a bow, basically. Now, what interests me most here is a crucial and often praised detail, which is this newspaper placed underneath the chair. Just as the chair itself, it serves to demonstrate that no trapdoor was in use. Because the idea is that were there a trapdoor, its use would rip a hole in this newspaper. Just as, of course, the chair sort of implies that she cannot pass through it to get out through the trapdoor. And now this element, the newspaper, reveals stage magic as a reflexive self-reflexive practice. Because first, it presupposes an audience that is familiar with the hidden technological repertoire of magicians well enough to know that things on stage disappear through trapdoors. This in turn assumes an audience curious about magicians' methods and therefore possibly familiar with the magical exposés that were popular at the time. The magician plays on the spectators' curiosity about the secret methods, as well as on their expectation concerning the method to produce this particular effect. He also shows that he is aware of the audience's familiarity with magic and its secrets, and he thirdly refers to the trapdoor as a possible technology used in this particular effect, as it performatively excludes its use on stage. Now, simply by placing the newspaper there underneath the chair, what he's saying implicitly is, I know what you're thinking, I've seen this before, there's a trapdoor, but I am going to show you something new because I demonstrate that I don't use a trapdoor and nonetheless the lady will vanish. Modern magic thus emerges as a second order observation as conceived by Niklas Luhmann. This is an observation of an observation. Descartes' newspaper creates an epistemological loop, if you will, which shows that the performer is aware of the spectators being aware that they witness an illusion. Moreover, he's nonetheless able to surprise them and to present an illusion that excludes this known method. Magic is thus a self-referential and self-reflexive practice. Reference to trapdoors and other possible hidden means of illusion is also a reference to the artificiality of the presented effect. It's a reference to the illusionism of magic itself because it implies that the spectators know that they are witnessing the effect of a technology. The vanishing lady, therefore, not only reflects on the artificiality of magic itself, but also the spectator's reflection about it. It does not only present an illusory effect, but it also points out that the spectators do not see how it is accomplished. They see that they do not see how the illusion is created. Now, towards the end, I want to talk a bit more about the media theory of negativity. Now, the fact that magicians underscore the invisibility of their means in their performances is a testimony, I would argue, of the insight that a medium works best when A, its effect emerges detached from its material basis, and B, when the latter is imperceptible. Let me just skip a little bit because I'm running out of time. And I'll talk about photography here. Now, of course, the disappearance of the medium behind its context is something that was first pointed out by pioneer of media theory, Marshall McLuhan. When talking about electric light as a medium without a message, he noted, quote, "It is only too typical that the content of any medium blinds us to the character of the medium." Philosopher and media theorist Sibylle Kremer calls this quality of media their blind spot or their aesthetic neutrality. And here's what she writes about it. Media work like window panes. The more transparent they remain, the more inconspicuously they stay behind the threshold of our awareness, the better they do their job. It is only in the noise, that it is in the dysfunction or even in the breakdown of this smooth service that the medium itself is recalled. The undistorted message, on the other hand, makes the medium almost invisible. So it is only when its working is disrupted that the device itself emerges as a technical apparatus, as a material object that is subject to wear and tear and malfunctions. In dysfunction, the medium itself becomes apparent. Along similar lines, media philosopher Dieter Mersch notes that media disappear as they take on the role of a placeholder of transmission. That's what he calls it. Unless media's own mediality becomes apparent in the moment of dysfunction, they work in an illusionistic way. Moreover, by themselves eluding definition through denial, because they become invisible, media provoke fascination, Meersch writes, and thus gain a proximity to magic. Now, as I have demonstrated, the imperceptibility of the workings underlying the illusions is a necessary condition for any performance of stage magic. The close-up performance is masterful when even those spectators who know how the feat is accomplished cannot discern the sleight of hand producing it. The grand illusion is successful when it makes the machinery, respectively the crucial part of it, disappear. Be it a trapdoor, a serving hatch, a false bottom, a hidden assistant, foldable objects produced from a seemingly too small container, or a key secretly handed over, they all create the effect, but must not become perceptible themselves. By making the person operation a prop responsible for the effect vanish, illusionists put their finger on a central characteristic of media technologies, which was articulated by media theory about a century later. Unlike in magical or spiritualist practices, secular magic not only seizes on media, but it analyzes them. Here, media effects are not merely presented, but they are exhibited as such. The techniques and technologies creating them are not only made invisible, this circumstance itself is emphasized. Now, by thus illustrating the mode of action of mediality, modern magic becomes itself a meta-theorization of media and media practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katharina, for this magical talk. We'll now take questions.
Yes, many thanks. Obviously, I can't help it, but I see many parallels you can draw with music and musical instruments. Your way of analyzing the magical tools and all that is very close to what you could say about musical instruments. Okay. And if there is a valid parallel, perhaps that the fine mechanics of musical instruments has some influence on the construction of theater and magic shows. Because in music, at least within the Western civilization, the instruments had to disappear. The ideal was the invisible voice.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. I was actually looking. This just might have nothing to do with what you said, or maybe it has, but it might be a possible angle for me. Because when I was thinking about the levitation and writing about those nice steel wires, I looked into the history of steel wires to find out when they came into appearance, and of course, yes, that they were created for the piano, and this probably the exact same thing that Maskelyne used for his levitation. So I found this, but I didn't really know what to do with it, except for historical things. But maybe that is something where I can.
It's just a thought.
Get it in there. Yes.
Work on this parallel.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
I was curious how you relate your historic perspective to, for example, the work of Marco Tempest, who's using these modern technologies, whereby he also seems to play with our expectations of what we think the technology can do, and then actually makes magic tricks that are as old as the world, making things disappear and appear again, making them digital and analog, just very basic tricks, but using modern technology for us to, for some reason, relate to anything better. So I was curious if you studied that present day context.
No, not at all. I must admit shamefully, I don't know anything about contemporary magic, for the simple reason that I had to narrow down the scale of this thing for this project to be workable. And already the 50 or 60 years that I'm dealing with is so huge that, of course, even within this time frame, I even had to narrow it down more and focus only on grand illusions, for instance, and only 6 of them. So had I like taken a look at and trying to sort of ignore, actively ignore anything contemporary and anything like before that time frame, to not make it explode, which is probably not good either, because it would be nice to have some contemporary examples.
I would be very interested to hear from you to what extent. I mean, a trap door is a mechanical system that, with our non-technical understanding, we can understand. And I'm just curious, with modern black box media, we don't understand our tools anymore. So how would that relate to that expectation management of the magician? But anyway.
No, I think actually, I mentioned that we don't have access to all this technology any longer. But there is something. I mean, it would only speak for the fact that this works even better because you have, like, your smartphone is already a magical device to you because it does strange things and puts something out, but you have no idea how it works. And if it breaks, there's no way you could repair it yourself. But there's actually been, to sort of draw a historical parallel, already at the time there were magicians who used radio transmitters, for instance, on stage, which is a similar thing because it existed, people knew it existed, but they didn't understand how it worked. And also in the early 20th century, as you probably all know, radio was linked to telepathy and to like supernatural transmissions, because there simply was no difference between the two in the minds of the people and even the researchers who worked with it. So I guess it's a similar thing going on there, and sometimes you find it in reviews that people say, well, it could have been a radio transmitter, but you realize they don't actually know how it works, so they have some kind of vague idea of what it can do and think that it might be used to do something magical. I guess it might connect to this smartphone technology.
In that respect, it's very interesting that we say that we don't understand technology anymore, whereas in fact you could also say we don't understand it yet, in the sense that you just said that when radio was new technology, it worked like magic, but when the technology is just gotten established, it doesn't have the effect of magic anymore, because we have through education, we understand it, we know how it works. And maybe just one other thing that may connect this idea of what you said about the voice.
The voice. The materiality of the voice.
And the embodiment.
It's very nice.
I think in whether you call it post-traumatic theater or it doesn't matter what you call it, the body as a medium that is visible has been forgotten because the body as a medium has been, it's been foregrounded in the sense that the personality of the actor is being foregrounded, or the effect of the viscerality of the body, but the body as a medium that transmits is fixed, which is not necessarily linked to a character. The body as a medium of text, of sound, has slightly been forgotten.
I think it's interesting what to think about that.
It's a great follow on from that. I think it's sometimes interesting to think through other media. So I'm thinking now from photography. I'm wondering whether or not one should think about these media though as being constitutively invisible. Yeah, so from photography, I'm thinking about retouching. You can just as well take the cloth. Yeah, so there is something about that you're constituting invisibility that I find really, really important. There's also the staging of nothing being there by the media process, rather than just saying they're not there. And I think similar with the voice, you're staging that very disappearance. So I think there's a step before that it's just very nice to think about. Also as something active.
Yeah, thank you.
One last question.
I just want to ask you, what do you understand of the medium? Was it the technology, the tool? I didn't get it in your talk. What's the medium?
It's because I didn't give a definition of a medium.
No, but you had before. Correct.
Yes.
I just wanted to develop on. Is it the tool? Is it the technique? Is it technology?
Yes, I guess what I said, in fact, was the medium in the broadest sense is something being in between. So it's
So this was the
very, no, this is Aristotle.
yeah, but
So this is very much just, like what Libera said as well.
Mediation. So the process of mediation, so Sibylle Hermann, she speaks of not a particular device,
Yes, so
just
it
a
can
process, dynamic process of mediation.
So, and as I said, it could, I mean, the telephone is a medium just as well as air is, or glass, or anything in between. So it's very much, I mean, this is very broad, of course, but this, what I guess I link to is the very ancient, antique understanding of the metaxou in Greek, the in-between, or the medium in Latin, which is something in between two other things that is mediating. And that is a lot to do with the way Sibylle Kremer perceives it, because she makes this difference between the instrument, the apparatus, and the medium. For her, these are three different things, and the medium is the most abstract, which is something to do with mediation and mediality. It is not necessarily an object, but a more broader concept.
I just wanted to point it out.
Yeah.
You wanted that you should point it out.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Katharina. We will now continue with our last, but not least, talk with Nele Wynants. I don't know if I pronounced it well. Nele is a postdoctoral researcher at the Université Libre de Bruxelles and University of Antwerp. She graduated in art history, performance, and media arts at Ghent and obtained a PhD in theater studies and intermediality at the University of Antwerp. In 2015, she was a visiting scholar at Université Libera, Laboratoire International de Recherche en Art, where she conducted archival research on scientific theater in the 19th century. She is involved in A Million Pictures, a European research project on the magic lantern as European cultural heritage, and she is a member of Spectacular Astronomy, a research network of theater scholars and historians of science from Paris, Berlin, Utrecht, and Strasbourg. She is editor-in-chief of Forum Plus for Research and Art, and published articles, book chapters, and art reviews on contemporary artists working at the intersection of theater, film, and media arts.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. Thank you for staying also another 20 minutes. I hope you're not too hungry. Maybe I should start with saying I will not read a paper with a theoretically developed argument, which is maybe a bit different from the previous papers, but I would like to take this opportunity to talk about a project, a recent project that was a collaboration with a video artist, Sarah Vanhoutte, for which I did some historical research, and that collaboration resulted actually in an exhibition that was on show in the Antwerp MUCA, the Antwerp Museum for Contemporary Art, and also at the International Film Festival of Rotterdam last January, February. This collaboration was not only fruitful from an artistic point of view, but also, and that is the subject of my talk today, from an academic point of view. It opened up to me a particular way or new way of doing research and dealing with historical sources, which started from contemporary questions on media and the history of media. I would like to, well, because it's a collaboration, to also briefly already point to my concluding remarks, allowed for a very experimental, sometimes pragmatic, and I would say material approach of history and the historical objects we were dealing with. For my presentation, I would like to start with briefly, I want to briefly sketch out the context and the framework of that collaboration, and I will end with, with some formulations of or observations and benefits, I would say, of this particular collaboration. this project is actually part of a larger project, which was already mentioned in my introduction. That is 1 million pictures. That is a European research project where Kurt is also part of, but also Sabine Lenk and Van Kessel, whom you probably have met during the conference, but they're now chairing other sessions, parallel sessions. So that is a collaboration between different European universities, Antwerp, Utrecht University, Exeter, Girona, and Salamanca, but also museums, collectors, and artists. And the goal of this research is to promote sustainable use and management of lantern slides, magic lantern slides that are held in various European collections, such as libraries, museums, and university museums. I'm not sure whether I need to introduce the magic lantern to this audience here. I guess most of you already have an idea, or probably the media and film scholars know it particularly from their film history books. We also see magic lanterns or lantern slides often exhibited in film history museums, but I want to stress actually that the magic lantern is far more than something that pertains to the history of cinema. It's actually, we consider it within that project as the most important, maybe it was the visual mass medium of the 19th century, the only visual mass medium. That was the first mass medium to contest what I mean, to contest a printed word as a primary mode of information and instruction. So it was not only used for popular entertainment, as you could see here in this slide, or for children's entertainment on the top. So in the top you see a children's lantern, but in the down below you see a more professional lantern that was used for large audiences. So it was not only used for entertainment, it was also used, for instance, for religious and political propaganda. I'll briefly show you a few images just to, as I said, to contextualize the project. So here you see a few examples. Next to that, it was also used to talk about what foreign countries, what was happening in the colonies, for instance, that was talked about during public lectures in theaters or public lecture halls, and then illustrated with magic lantern slides. Here you see photographic lantern slides, but they were often also hand painted. And last but not least, it was also used, and that is less known, for the popularization of science. Kurt already talked about popularization of astronomy, and Henri Aubin you see here in it's the same picture you saw already in the previous presentation. But it was also on other subjects, such as geography, biology, astronomy, as was shown, and other subjects, to popularize science for large audiences, not only at universities and at schools, but also in theater houses. Now, the goal, as I said, of that European project is to develop tools for the documentation, preservation, and digitization of lantern slides, because a lot of museums, libraries hold hundreds, even thousands of glass plates, and mostly they don't know what to do with it. So we are creating within this project create a kind of manual, let's say, to help them to create also standards for the digitization and the preservation of this precarious heritage, because we consider it as an important cultural heritage, not only in Europe, of course, also in the United States and elsewhere. But another part of the project is to create forms of reuse, we call it, creative reuse, because for a museum and in general, cultural heritage institutions, the real endeavor is to bring back this collection back alive, let's say, for a contemporary audience. How can we open up this collection, make it interesting again for contemporary viewers? And in that sense, we make a distinction between two ways of dealing with the lantern as cultural heritage. The first one is, we consider it in a more classic way as heritage that can be put on show, so that we can demonstrate or exhibit through, for instance, exhibitions of lanterns and slides in museums. That's maybe the most common way of just put it on showing and the objects, the artifacts. But there, of course, you don't have a sense of what it must have been like, how it was projected at the time. So it was, of course, a medium for projection for a live audience. So demonstrating the artifact had, of course, its limitations. Another thing that you see often is that lanterns, museums, for instance, organize educational workshops with children to get children make their own lantern or their own slides. And then you see also a third way that is often collectors with their own lantern slides and their own historical lanterns. They give historically inspired performances for an audience. So we call it historically inspired reenactments. Now, the project I want to talk about with Sarah Vanhoutte is actually, we therefore developed a different approach, which we call a contemporary lantern approach. Could use the word artistic reenactment. Maybe it can, I can use it again, because here we consider the lantern more as a source for contemporary artistic inspiration and reflection. That is at the same time a starting point for new work in which the contemporary viewpoint allows a dialogue between past and present. And in that way, it can reflect, it allows us to reflect on the history and the archaeology of media. Media archaeology is, in that sense, also our larger framework, the framework we're working in. I don't know if I need to say much about that, because already during the keynote by Gaudriot and Philippe Marion yesterday, they already gave us a beautiful example of the media archaeology of the digital. So as you probably all know, media archaeology is an emerging field of media research. It's an approach both in our academic research, but also, and that is interesting for us, in an artistic practice. And although it does not offer a clear-cut methodology, the authors within this field, they share the idea, or they share a kind of critical distance, or a critical approach of the dominant theological approaches of media history, or media history in general, or film history. Scholars in this field use multiple sources and various methods, but they share just that a view that media archaeology's central premise is to posit alternative genealogies for the development of technology over time. What they do often is then propose an opposite logic by focusing, for instance, on forgotten, as was done in the keynote, by focusing on forgotten or extant media devices and practices. They stress alternative possibilities. So back again to the project with Sarah Vanhoutte, the video artist, we started, in this case, from a particular collection in Antwerp, which is the Vreeling collection accumulated by Robert Vreeling. He was a solicitor from Bruges with a particular interest in the history of the moving image. So it's for Belgian norms, it's a pretty large collection, but compared to international norms, it's rather small. But it comprises early film cameras and projectors, film posters, optical devices, photos, merchandising, shares, lobby cards, and catalogs. But also, and that's of course what interested us, a beautiful collection of lanterns, magic lanterns, and slides. And it's maybe a bit strange, but this collection now is held by the Museum for Contemporary Art in Antwerp, which is a weird situation, because in the museum there's not really somebody with the knowledge of the historical magic lantern, so they're dealing with contemporary art, but in this ambivalent situation, also opens up opportunities. And in this case, for instance, the MUCA, the museum, considers this collection as an area of study for researchers and artists. So they consider it as a collection that can play a crucial role in giving us a better insight into our visual culture, so to connect it to the contemporary. So they have been organizing several exhibitions lately, and within this series of exhibitions in which they invited contemporary artists to work with that collection, or to take that collection as a starting point to go into dialogue with that media, the history of media, we also invited, that is within the context of that European project, the University of Antwerp, invited Sarah Vanhoutte, a video artist, to develop a project starting from the magic lanterns. Now, Sarah Vanhoutte showed a particular interest in a specific type of lantern. First of all, the children's lanterns in the collection. You see her here working, trying things out with the children's lanterns in the collection, assisted by Sabine. And the other type of lantern, which is not part of the collection, but what is an interesting thing in the history of the magic lantern, is a projection microscope. Because the projection microscope is connected to another project of her on the discoveries in the field of optics and microscopy. So she's now working on a film on this figure of Antony van Leeuwenhoek. I won't go into detail on that, but I only want to briefly mention that he's considered to be the inventor of the microscope. And he was using, well, he developed lenses. He was a carpenter, a carpenter, and he developed lenses to see to check the quality of the tissue. And apparently he was the first to observe and describe microorganisms or moving animals, animalcules, he names it, in one drop of rainwater. Now, what the magic lantern has in common, of course, with the microscope is that the core function of the two machines consists of enlarging something that is initially quite small. Very, very, very easy. But with the invention of the projection microscope, which is actually a combination of a traditional magic lantern with a microscope, and of course the arrival of gaslight, microscopy developed in the first half of the 19th century into a successful public spectacle. Because of course, whereas the microscope only allowed one individual viewer to see the magnified image, with the projection microscope, microscopic images could be shared with larger audiences. So for instance, here on the left, you see a picture of someone using a microscope, looking through a microscope, whereas on the right, you see the different types of lanterns, magic lantern, and in the middle, projection microscope, where you can enlarge, of course, things such as insects, but also smaller things. Okay, I have only 5 minutes left, so I'll just show you a few historical examples, and then I'll jump to my concluding remarks. So one of the best known examples of microscopic theater, I would like to call it, was Philip Carpenter's Microcosm. It was a public exhibition of the projection microscope in London in the beginning of the 19th century. So for the price of 1 shilling, visitors were able to see enlarged tiny living organisms invisible to the naked eye. And for instance, sites on display included a slice of twig from a lime tree, a louse, and a piece of iron. But also the life in one drop of water from the River Thames. And that is something that is nicely described, and also, well, historical testimonies give us a very nice idea of how it must have looked like. This is a nice engraving entitled Monster Soup, commonly called Thames Water. And for instance, the German Prince Buchler Muskau wrote in one of his travel diaries how he visited the exhibition by Carpenter, and he writes, "I went to see the solar microscope, but what it shows is really enough to drive a man of lively imagination mad. Nothing can be more horrible, no more frightful. The village figures could be possibly be invented than the hideous, disgusting water animal clay, invisible to the naked eye, or even to glasses of inferior power, which we daily swallow. So, as you can see, or as you can read from the beginning, the microscope fulfilled a dual function. As both an instrument of scientific research and entertainment, it provided excellent playful forms of research. So it was this particular projection microscope, or this particular historical microscope, that was very inspiring to Sarah Vanhoutte for her project. As these kinds of slides, I'll just show you very briefly. These are nice examples of antique microscope slides. For the exhibition, and she made an exhibition in which she made an installation and 2 short films. I don't have time to show you the films, of course, but if you're interested, I can show them to you afterwards. For the installation, she used the original children's lanterns from the Rein collection that were put on show, and for which she, by means of Scotch tape, which created a kind of link between them, and on the Scotch tape she pasted organic material, reminiscent, of course, of these organic slides, historical slides. And of course, the whole tape is also reminiscent of the film tape. So there you see a kind of dialogue with the history of film. But I'll jump to my concluding remarks. So not only does the lantern, or the contemporary lantern art, let's call it like that, allows us to connect to the history of media, and it simulates, of course, an awareness of the importance of the magic lantern as cultural heritage. But it also, and that was my goal, of course, the question is, of course, what this collaboration, this experimental collaboration, brought me as a researcher, and what were the benefits of this encounter between media archaeology and theater studies, because that was actually my goal. One of the goals of my research is to connect the media archaeological approach or perspective to theater studies, because the history of theater and media are closely intertwined. Theater has always embraced or integrated new media. So first of all, first benefit, I would call it, is the re-evaluation. Yes, the re-evaluation of intuition and the imaginary in theater and media history, because the interaction between historical research and artistic practice allowed for a more intuitive approach of dealing with historical sources. And with that, I mean that our research was not systematic organized, but it was more intuitive and pragmatic. What do we need? What do we want to know? Who can help us with that? Where do we find what we need? These kind of questions steered the research, and it brought us at places that I would never have gone to myself as a researcher. Being an artist or working with artists opens sometimes doors that you cannot open yourself as a researcher. Okay, I'll have to finish. So this work has strengthened my conviction that we need to revalue the imaginary in our lives and works as academics. Especially those working in the field of art and media history and theory, because of course both theater and media are the result of human imagination. Go not into detail now, but the second thing I wanted to say about that is that this collaboration also allowed for a more material way of dealing with history. And the material aspects of an archaeological approach should be or can be understood in this case very literally. So the idea of media archaeology as a concrete activity, as a material engagement with devices and sources. So we really made our hands dirty by working with the objects, in this case the slides and the lanterns, using them, testing them. And this gives a totally different understanding of the historical object and historical lantern culture. So this proved to be also, to me, very fruitful and complementary to what I usually do, and that is mostly literature study and source analysis. So by testing the lanterns with different light sources and in different types of settings, we try to build an understanding of both the material traces and objects, and the historical context, of course, but as well as the creative performative event. So by really doing or enacting the historical show, we could have tried to create another kind of knowledge, maybe kind of an embodied knowledge, but was a term that was already used. And finally, this material approach touches on another issue that media and theater historians have in common, that is an interest in the conditions under which the absent past can be said to have presence in the present. So this discourse, of course, is also concerned with the conditions for and effects of both immediacy and mediation, the central theme of this conference. So Vivian Sobczak rightly points out that central to media archaeology is the discourse of presence and its particular concern with the past and the conditions under which it can be re-presenced. So presence in this context, because of course theater scholars among us know that there are several ways of conceptualizing presence. So presence in this context can be understood as, and I quote Vivian Sobczak, the literal transhistorical, yet not ahistorical, transference or relay of metonymic and material fragments or traces of the past through time to the here and now, where and when these can be activated and thus realized once again in our practical, operative and sensual engagement with them. So indeed, many media archaeologists, maybe amongst them myself, are concerned not only with recovery and description of previously neglected or forgotten artifacts, but also with the techno-historical event, performative event. Now, this presence of the past in the here and now has, in another context, been described by Hans Ulrich Gumbrecht as the presentification of the past. According to Gumbrecht, this has little, if anything, to do with the traditional project of history as an academic discipline, with the project of interpreting, that is, reconceptualizing our knowledge about the past, but instead, what Gumbrecht terms the presentification of the past worlds, or past worlds, is about experiencing the past by techniques that produce the impression, or rather the illusion, and that is a quote by Gumbrecht. So, the experiencing of the past by, and I quote, techniques that produce the impression, or rather the illusion, that worlds of the past can become tangible again. That is the end of quote, and I'm ending my presentation. So to end, I would like to return to the central theme, the so-called paradoxical title of this conference, Authentic Artifice, and the tension between liveness, immediacy, and mediation. Because what I wanted to say, that working with material objects and considering a medium as an historical material artifact heightens a sense, maybe the illusion of being able to literally grasp or touch the past. And this idea of touching, the sense of touch has already been touched upon yesterday by Joe Culpepper, but also by Clemens Gruber in his talk as an important way of creating a feeling of authenticity. So getting to know the way a technology works at the same time, not only lays bare the mediation process, it produces another form of authenticity, as Giel Kattenbelt also pointed out in his talk, that is the authenticity of the materiality of the artifact and the mediation process. So through a transhistorical artistic practice, these artifacts, these material objects, might be able to unveil or re-presence the past in the here and now. It might be an illusion, I'm aware of that. It might be an artifice, but in that sense, it is an authentic artifice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nele. I know we're running a bit late and some people are very hungry, but it would still be nice to have some questions for Nele. There's no other sessions after, so it could be. I'm kind of a flexible moderator, maybe too flexible, but so we're open for questions.
too hungry.
Yes.
I'll ask a quick one. This installation by the artist Vanhoutte, is that your name? When you mentioned the tape, I thought instantly of Stan Brakhage.
Yes.
And was that a conscious reference for her? Or no?
Well, funny enough, it wasn't. But no, yes, after, well, she was already working. No, wait, she was working. She was already interested in these slides with material or organic material, let's say. And she was already developing some ideas for the exhibition, and somebody then from the project came also with a Stan Brakhage reference. Mod Life, you mean? Yes, this is Mod. So it was not really, but then she of course got to know it, and there is a very clear link. Yeah, that's true.
Thank you very much, Nele, for these talks, and fascinating. I had no idea about the microscopic cycle. I'm curious in your documentation of the installation here. The goal is to get people to grasp the text of the past, and just I want to know like how long did the installation run? What was the audience spectator reception? I see all the technology and images, but I don't see spectators interacting. So I'm just curious. I mean, it's a challenge for all of us anytime we're doing kind of these recreations or adaptations of historical performances. What is their value for society today and the cultural value? At the time, they were popular entertainment, economic value, obviously popular interest. Today, sometimes you can use more antiquated technologies or experiments. It's tough to connect it to people in a way that resonates. So I'm just curious where you are, and also maybe what the future of it is if you're continuing, or if this is, kind of a done project for you.
Yeah, thank you for the nice and rich remarks. First of all, when I'm talking about the past becoming almost tangible or that we can experience this past at a certain point, I was referring actually to ourselves as researchers. That doing historical research in this way, by really working with the objects, enables another way of dealing with the past, and in a way bring it back or experience it in a contemporary way, which is of course always difficult to say. You never know. But when it comes to the audience, honestly, that is a totally different thing, because it, of course, first of all, it was exhibited in a museum for contemporary art, and the project was, or the exhibition was opened during a workshop that was organized within the Million Pictures project. So we were there with, I think, about 50 people, European people, that are doing research on the magic lantern. So I should talk to them, of course, first. And I think they have, of course, a totally different experience, because they know the historical context a little bit, and then they see this kind of artistic reinterpretation, let's say. I'm not sure about the other audience. That is something honestly, I just don't know, because yeah, we were not there all days to talk to them. And the same goes for, in Rotterdam, it was part of a larger exhibition on also media archaeology. So there, again, I honestly don't know if the film, I would have loved to show you the short films, and there maybe it gives, it still is a contemporary reinterpretation. It's not like a documentary. It's not documenting how it should have been like at the time. No, it's really a rework. Well, she reworked the historical sources and reinterpreted them. And but what she managed to do, I can say, is that this effect of, the materiality of these slides, because often you see in museums where they put slides on show, and sometimes they digitize the effects and then they project it, and you always have the idea that it's not at all, it's totally different, that digitized image. Whereas Sarah, in her installation, really managed to have this tactile effect, because she uses this kind of organic material. So that's something she managed, but it's always, of course, different to judge whether that is historical correct or not. And then to answer your last question, yes, it is an ongoing project. So this is now, she's now preparing a next project that came out from this, in which she will work with children again and also make a film in different cities based on the work she's been doing. So yes, we will continue the work. This is like an intermediate moment.
I think this was a very high-level panel. The intellectual level was fascinating, going from enigmatic Heidegger to magic, from the macrocosmos to the microcosmos. And I'm sure like it would have been interesting to have a period of questions maybe between the speakers. There's a lot of connections I find in the papers, but I think we're going to have to do it around lunch, maybe in more embodied fashion, perhaps. So I thank you very much for coming here on a Saturday morning. And I thank our